people in power a very long time ago, and that tradition has just stuck. And there's no reason to say that, you can't free yourself from those assumptions or those particular regulations.
No, right. And a minuscule aspect of that, a sheep will walk into a room full of people and they'll ask themselves, I wonder if they like me. But a wolf will walk in and ask themselves, I wonder if I like them.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Sure. And I think, I'd like to think that I don't think that you're capable of really putting yourself in 100% of one of the other mind frames, because I think that in a sense it's not really it may not be a binary thing. Of course there's going to be times where you're considering whether or not somebody else is happy with you, unless you want to be just devoid of any and all connection. But you should more often than not be confident with your own self and not be questioning yourself and have these self-doubts, and be more interested in choosing who's right for you based upon what you are confident about yourself, than trying to just appease other people for the sake of really for the sake of just feeling like you're more secure in other people's I guess control or safety, which probably more often than not is an illusion.
It's to each his own. It's whatever somebody's prerogative is. It doesn't matter what someone else thinks, as long as it makes you happy. You know what I mean? Love is not a linear equation. It's a zero. It's a circle, and it goes in all directions.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. I would call it like Euclidean space. A circle
Yeah.
is another good way to put it. If you compress the Euclidean space in 2 dimensions, you get exactly a circle. So I understand. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In fact, I think my girlfriend is probably going to end up making. Are you making solo porn? Is that what you do? She's making solo porn. Okay. So
unless you want to do it with me.
we can do whatever you like. I don't care. But yeah, I can rematch you one more time if you want.
Yeah, we can do one more.
Okay. Yeah. So when did you start using this app?
Like a week ago.
Yeah, I knew. I kind of figured you were new because.
Well, I got banned. I just made this account like yesterday.
What did you get banned for?
I was playing Truth or Dare.
No. Yeah, I get it.
No, but this really innocent, nice older lady ran out of dares for me to do. So I was like, hey, you should dare me to see my goat.
Oh, okay.
So I put my balls between my legs and I mooned the camera.
It's amazing that this technology has that. Like, they haven't updated the GIFs. Like, they update the GIFs so rarely, yet their modbot technology, their moderation technology, can pinpoint a pair of testicles underneath a guy's ass like that. Like, that's fucking. What the fuck is that? Like, what is that about?
I don't know, man.
Yeah, I got banned for a 3-hour ban, not a serious ban, but I got banned for being in the bathtub last night in a button-down shirt, a tie, and a pair of pants, and a pair of Sesame Street socks. That was it. I got banned for that. They called it sexual misconduct, and I was like, "What part? The Sesame Street socks? I'm dressed like a professional. I'm giving people professional advice on how to be a professional idiot. Like, that's what I'm doing, and it's like there's nothing, there's no sexual misconduct going on, but that's what they perceived it as. That's what I got banned for. So, what happened? But what am I going to do? I sat out the 3-hour ban, and at midnight, actually 12:01, the ban was lifted. Right back on, right back at it. Unfortunately, my viewers were not there with me, but you can't just let them get away with anything. You got to fight back a little bit.
A little bit, yeah, absolutely.
Like, I've been streaming. I started at 1:30, so this is now on 6 hours. I've been streaming, which is not good. It's not good I don't feel well, but I feel like a responsibility at this point to myself to now go into absolute exhaustion, because I have taken it this far. So why not? Why not?
No, I feel the same way, man. Sometimes I'll stream for like 12 hours straight. You feel like shit, but you can't stop. This app is kind of evil.
You feel real bad. Like, I got up to take a piss before, and I had like vertigo. Like I don't ever lay down for this much amount of time. Like I'm always doing something, moving around, and when I got up, I was like, my body is like, you know, this is not good. This is really, you gotta change something. What did I do? Came right back to the couch, laid down, assumed the position, and took that meat me dick right up the ass, like it wants me to. So, no, bro, just I'm just a slave to this fucking this streaming shit.
Yeah, well, there's nothing to do in a pandemic.
I know that's the problem. That's why this works so well for them. I think that it's weird because this thing has been around for maybe 4 or 5 years, and now it's like more popular than ever. It's like they lucked out so fucking hard on this fucking pandemic shit. This is the one business. Also Zoom, like this business is like the best business to be in for a fucking pandemic. People can't.
Dude, do you know what they need to make?
What?
They need to make an app that's like a Facebook group where you have to answer questions before you can get in. That way it's only cool people in there. Because I'm tired of all the negative shit on here, man.
Yeah, no, I get it. But like the problem with that is people could always lie about the questions. They figure it out eventually. They're going to game the system, right?
Yeah, I suppose. But you could make it a little more difficult, and a lot of those weak ass people would just give up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, what line of questioning could you ask to kind of eliminate assholes from the question? What would you ask people?
That's a great question in itself. My first question would be, what are you?
Like in terms of occupation, or just in terms of like how a person identifies himself?
No, as in terms of like, I would be looking for answers like, well, I am energy, I am God, but not like I am God, like deeper than that. You know what I mean? Like people that think outside the box.
So you would have, in order to do that, I think you would have to have a very selective algorithm or something. Because you're gonna get a lot of applications, and then you have to basically tell the algorithm how to think or how to draw its conclusions and reason going forward. So you'd have to find a way to say, well, we're only going to accept people who give abstract titles to the question, what are you? Only identify with abstract thoughts. And then you might have a pool of creative people, but I don't know necessarily that it would eliminate person from being negative.
Rude. Yeah.
I don't know that one thing. It's really tough. You could also really make a very rigorous process of let's say, having a person answer questions about the way you're supposed to interact with people. And then maybe that would, filter out, a negative person's like, I'm not going to answer 100 questions about, how the right way to interact with another person because I don't give a fuck anyway because I'm an asshole. Maybe that would work. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. But though there are certain services that do that. They don't necessarily do it that well, but like there's certain dating applications where it's like you don't make a certain amount of money or you don't fill out certain things appropriately. They just don't. They say, well, we have no matches. There's nobody here for you. You don't use the service. We're not taking your money. Like we don't want you on here. That does exist. So depending on and sometimes these are not applications yet. I don't think. I don't think. But like if you go on a website to like if you maybe this is not a good example, but if you go let's say you go to join a club, like a swingers club, like they ask you questions that you're supposed to write out answers to, and they're going to evaluate you on a case-by-case basis as far as whether or not the answers are indicative of somebody they would want to have a member of their club, and also depending on who they have and what their interests are and what you are and what your interests are, to see if you're filling like the marketplace, so to speak. And because you have unicorns, you have all these different things. You have BDSM people, you have cuckold people, you have all these different things, all these different. And if that's not something that a lot of people are wanting, maybe they'll just say, hey, it's not that we wouldn't take this person because they're bad, but we just don't have the demand for it right now. So I don't, whether or not that can be carried over into an application is a more complicated question, because it's not. I don't think they have enough manpower to read every single answer that everybody would give. But it's be really interesting to see if there was a technology development that could kind of weed out less desirable um, less desirable people in terms of how they use the service, I guess.
Well, man, like in a pandemic, so many people don't have anything to do. So say you had what, 10 people reading over applications.
Yeah.
I feel like that would be enough manpower to grow enough to allow those people to be admins as well that get accepted, and they could also take on the workload.
Maybe.
Kind of like a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, like a pyramid scheme.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I wonder if you could. Yeah, I wonder if 10 people would do it, because what's going to happen is people are going to have to wait in the beginning. I mean, there's just once the app is out, if it starts to get traction, maybe not the very beginning, but once it starts to get traction, it's hard to predict exactly what the traffic flow is going to be, and it's hard to predict exactly when it's going to peak or when it's going to start to ramp up. It's hard to know. I mean, how would you know without going through the process? So you're hoping it's going to be big, but if you overhire, you're spending more money than you can afford because your customer acquisition cost is too high. Not enough people are subscribing. Obviously, you're not doing something right. If you have too few people, well, now your product is something somebody wants, but people can't get on because they can't get vetted. So you're bottlenecking your own revenue. So it's like it's hard to figure out the happy medium there. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm sure it is possible in a I think it's an idea that's a good idea and should, I think machine learning is something that could play into that very well, but that's a whole other area of, I'm not an expert, but it's a very, very deep area. And I think that's a relevant thing, but, and it's a good idea, but, I just don't know enough about it to really say for sure.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just a thought.
Yeah. I mean, I studied physics. I was always interested in philosophy to a point, because there is such a thing as the philosophy of quantum mechanics, which is a branch of physics. I don't know that I'm interested in all areas of philosophy, but if somebody has a deep philosophical way of thinking, I'm interested. So I've listened to people philosophize the impact of an artificial intelligence and machine learning on people, and through that listening from the philosophy perspective, you become interested a little bit in how machine learning works. But to say that I have a really that I have an expertise or a really good even a decent understanding of how it operates is just, I know better. I know how hard it was to get through physics as a science to begin with. I would never be so presumptuous to say I assumed that I was fluent in anything that I hadn't really put the work into. I know better than that. So I think most people do. I don't think that people go around, but you get a couple know-it-all fucks that just make it, you want to fucking bang your head against the wall listening to them. It's like, because they just know they're right, and that's really irritates the shit out of me when somebody knows for 100% that they're right about something they put no work into. That's tough for me, but
That's why I try to be mindful. I study psychology.
Sure.
I'm actually in school for it right now. I usually just sit back and observe and perceive people for what they are. And I can see you're a very meticulous man. You're a very intelligent man.
I try.
And you don't even have to try. It's in your biology, man.
Probably to an extent. Yeah. I think, what I think it is, more than anything else, I was always a very curious person. I wanted to know how things worked. When I knew how things worked, I always was looking for a deeper understanding, or if not deeper, just I wanted to see if there was a way to understand it even better. I always had that type of curiosity, and it didn't necessarily apply to everything, but I was able to apply it enough and do well enough so that I was able to choose a field in which I think that suited me well enough to get to wherever I needed to get to. But this, when doing that, it's a very humbling process in a way, because the more you learn about one thing, the more you're aware of there's so many things you can learn about. And to assume, to say I'm smart is, I always thought it was I like to say I have the aptitude for this or I have the aptitude for that, because there are really smart people who are smart in completely different ways than I'm smart. And to say they're less smart than me would be, very self-centered. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to take away intelligence from a person who studies philosophy or psychiatry or economics or anything really. If you're good at what you do, you're good at what you do, and I really don't care much beyond that. In my dealings with another person, I like to see that they're curious and diligent in handling what it is that they do, and I ultimately, if they are, I can't not respect them for it. I do.
Right. So, um, so think back to a time before you understood consciousness. Do you remember the first question you ever asked yourself? Because I personally remember exactly where I was, exactly what season it was, and the exact question I asked myself when I realized I was consciousness.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I understand what you're saying. I remember the first. I have my very first memory of wondering what happened. And now I was asking myself a question, but I wasn't doing it in words. I was wondering. I had curiosity as to how something was working. I was in a walking stroller, and it's one of the very few things I remember from my childhood. I don't really remember anything that 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 precedes this, but I was in like a walking stroller, one of those self-walking strollers, and I figured out at a point that I could manipulate my walking stroller so that I could walk backwards. And my my home had like a small like kind of square hallway. So I walked backwards around the square, and I remember looking at my mother who saw me, and I was very young, and she looked at me, and I smiled and I laughed. I remember laughing, and I remember this excitement because I went around in a different way, and I really didn't know how it happened because I did it. I did it. It was the physical curiosity of manipulating my own body. It wasn't a premeditated thought. So that is the closest thing I could give you in terms of the first real question I asked myself, in the sense that at the moment I had an excitement and I had a curiosity about how the simple process of walking backwards through a small square hallway structure happened to me when I didn't premeditate it to happen. It just kind of emerged out of the experimentation of my own body in the moment, which is kind of it makes it sound like a more profound thing than it is, but that is probably the best answer.
It's not. It's like evolution.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it's the mind body connection where you're experimenting physically and you're creating these neural connections and this muscle memory in a developing body and mind that allows you to. I mean, that is really it's the first stages of learning and memory and everything that I think ultimately weaves itself into a state of consciousness, and that's a very developmental process, I would assume, even though I'm not a neurologist, I'm not a clinical psychiatrist, and I'm probably not qualified to say. I would say I assume that the emergent nature of consciousness is one that is very much affected in the developmental stage, and very much affected by simpler things than that, simpler things like that. That if you just said, like straight out, I did this and didn't say anything else about, nobody would really think that deeply into. And yet, you're the very foundation and bedrock of what emerges to eventually be your consciousness is kind of starting to weave together through these very simple mind-body connections, these very simple processes, I think.
Right. And you can disagree with me if you want to when you say this, but I believe that traumas can also be good things. Anything that takes up space in your mind and envelops you so much that you can actually feel the way you felt in that moment is a trauma.
Right. I understand what you're saying. Sure. I think that definitely a little bit is super necessary. If you're a trust fund kid and you're born with a trust fund, I somehow have this feeling that you'll never come to appreciate certain things as much as other people who work for them. I just can't see it. Now, does that mean you can't live a happy life or you can't be a decent person? Not at all. But see how people with money change. And you can only imagine having an unlimited amount of disposable income at a certain point in your life and knowing it's coming and knowing that you've never worked for it, how that would affect your psychology. And you hear stories about it and you can use kind of deductive reasoning to assume that one might be better off having worked and struggled for that. And if you consider that a form of minor trauma to go through the ups and downs of failure and figuring things out, then absolutely, I would have to agree. I don't think there's any other way about it. I think it's necessary to have to to struggle to survive in the most fundamental sense. In terms, if you're talking about life, it has to, life evolved through more failure than it did success. Like genetics seems to, or genome, or whatever I don't know the correct term, but evolution seems to happen through the process of trial and error at a very, very, very large scale over a very, very large amount of time. And it would make sense that what is really the most significant emerges out of the majority of which that fails, because that's what's going to make it. If things are to change, it can't all be changing together at one time. There has to be a minority that branches apart that ultimately does better than the other part that can't keep up. And so it makes sense, definitely, that some type of struggle to make a character worthwhile would.
Would you have guessed that I'm a trust fund kid?
No, I mean, I wouldn't have thought about it one way or the other. If you asked me, I would have said I don't know, because I don't want to make assumptions about what a person. Like I said before, I would never say that a person who's a trust fund person wouldn't be able to live a happy life or be a decent person. I would never assume that, but I would think there would be challenges. That person would have to be self-aware, and they'd have to choose to do something hard, I think, and put themselves through something so that they kind of were able to put things into to context in a constructive way, if not only for the sake of not taking things for granted. And I think that but I'm not mad at all about a person having an inheritance or anything like that. I think that's every person has every right to. I just think it comes with a certain amount of risk if you're talking about how a person develops. But I wouldn't guess one way or the other.
Well, I perceive money differently than someone who isn't a trust fund kid, who had to struggle for their money and work hard for it. I work hard, but money lacks substance to me. It's just paper.
Right.
It's just paper to me.
You become kind of agnostic to the idea of, it gets to a point where any more money is not as exciting as it would be for somebody who could use more money. And that's, that to me is very easy to understand. And perhaps that could be a different way of looking at it, in which that would benefit a person, because so much of the world seems to be controlled by the desire for money, that if you take that out of the equation, you could imagine how a person would be maybe more genuine in their approach to other people, because they're simply not trying to always wheel and deal their way through life. They're trying to make genuine connections. So definitely that's, I think, a good way of, and I hadn't thought about it that way until you mentioned it, but it is I think it's an important point. Yeah.
Do you think somebody who has had to grind and work harder for their money would then in turn quite possibly be more greedy than somebody that didn't?
That's really, there's different ways to look at greed. And I think that, that really boils down to your value system, because I can see that working either way. I can see a person who has an inheritance who is either taught to value money in a certain way, in which it's not take this money and be more successful. Maybe a personality like that might be Donald Trump, let's say, for example, who's a guy who started out with a good amount of money, but was hell-bent on making as much money as he could and taking crazy risks, sometimes at his own demise. And for what reason, I couldn't really say, because I would never do that myself. That's not what I would choose to do, I don't think. So that's a very good question. On the other hand, I can see somebody who has grinded their whole life, being very restrictive in terms of how generous they are, because they're always looking at it as like, I worked this hard. What the fuck did you do? And it's like, I'm never going to forget how hard it was for me. On the other hand, I can see somebody coming from that background who goes, I really do understand how hard it is. I want to help as many people as I can. So that's really just a personality thing. That's developmental. That's they're probably very developmental in terms of the kinds of people you have around you while you are developing, and who influences you to think what way sociologically. I don't think there's any one way depending on which end of the spectrum you come from.
It's all about moral fiber.
Yeah,
And a lot of people lack moral fiber
a lot of
and
people.
virtues
Yeah,
because they see the material world, and it's a material world. They don't see the underlying value of things. And
well,
that's humanity. That's empathy. It's love. Those should be the main priorities in people's lives, and it's not.
yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And it really, one of the things is that you said it very well. It's just, you know, it, I think it really, really, really depends a lot on who is giving you what information at what time. People always assume that this idea of free will is ubiquitous throughout consciousness. Now, I'm not saying it's a constructive way to go through your life and assume that you're not capable of making your own decisions. There's no point. I'm not that deterministic, but I'm deterministic enough to say that there are certain things that are simply unavoidable given variable. Like certain forms of, like, for example, if you're like, to say, for example, and this is a random example, to say if you're molested as a child, that will have no negative impact on your own psychology, I think is a very, I think the evidence would show completely contrary. Now, I've done no studies and I've read no studies. I've done no work other than listen to the, every single person who has ever proclaimed to have go through that also proclaim that they have, suffered very negative consequences because of it. One could make the argument, oh, so what? It happened, and a person is strong enough to just choose to get over it. I don't know if that's how human psychology really works. I have no reason to assume it works that way. I have no reason to assume it works that way. I have no reason to assume this whole idea, like, pull yourself up by your fucking bootstraps and just get the fuck over it. How do you know that the human mind is just capable of simply getting over any particular thing? So in that sense, I do really put the probability in favor of developmental variables shape a person more than one would like to admit when they think about themselves in terms of their own identity. Often a person will think, I became myself through by virtue of myself. Like, which is not a bad way to feel about yourself in terms of feeling good about yourself, but it's good to be aware that you are a product of many things, not just your own, ultimately your own choice. You are very much emergent of other things that you really had no control over. That's neither an excuse nor something to brag about. It's just a reality, I think.
Well, I will tell you that statement hits very close to home for me. I do understand exactly what it feels like to have been molested.
Oh, damn.
And
Sorry.
and I don't think I'll ever fully get over it, man.
Well, no, I don't think I
But
don't think.
at the same time, I don't use it as a crutch to prevent me from succeeding in life.
Sure. Look, like I said, it's. I would never say that a person should not understand that these things come with serious, serious consequences, and that as a society we need to view them as as just that. I mean, very bad things that are not person's fault ultimately do affect the way a person is. That's a reality. On the other hand, I do also believe that a person can be self-aware enough to live their life to the best of their ability going forward, understanding that as agents of free will, we are expected to do the best we can do at each moment of self-reflection going forward. I think there's really no better way to think about it. So, it's a balance between, thinking about those two things, but there's, in no way do I think as a person is necessarily damned. At the same time, I don't think a person is ever necessarily cured, so to speak, of whatever the event was that had a negative impact on their life. I think things continue to move on and become more complex until the universe comes to a state of thermodynamic equilibrium and there is no more fluctuation. So, I think things just roll on. I don't think there's, and if you don't roll with them, you don't. Damn, I hope I didn't make him feel bad. We had like a fucking long ass conversation. Damn. So this was a guy who was playing Truth or Dare with me, and he kept saying dare when I asked him truth or dare, and I kept upping. I didn't want to hurt the guy, but like I asked him to like fall off a chair. He fell off a fucking chair. Pretty boss ass move. Oh here. Sorry, I lost you.
That's all right, man.
Yeah. So I guess that would be a good way to sum up my very abstract way of thinking about it. I don't know that I'm not the type of I'm introspective, but just enough to know that I'm probably not the most helpful person in terms of how I could make somebody feel better always. But I definitely appreciate it's very big of you to be able to admit that to a person who you've just started talking to this day, like who you have no reason to admit that to. I guess that's indicative in a way of you consciously and constantly not trying but very much using a coping mechanism because you are self-aware enough that it is necessary for the betterment of yourself, which is a higher conscious quality to me, and one that you'll be much better off for, I think. So that's the one. If there is a quote unquote, I hate this term, but if there's a quote unquote silver lining out of an absolutely fucking horrendous thing, that's the way I think that's the best way I could perceive it. And again, I don't like the term silver lining because it's just a fucking dumbass fucking thing to you're not a cloud, right? But I, in a way, it's like it's a very big thing of you in a way to be able to just come out and admit that. I think it's probably more healthy than it's not.
Well, I pride myself on my honesty, and if I can help one person, I'll be content.
Bro, like I said, I knew you were a real one when you fucking fell off the chair. Shit, I knew you were. I knew you really were. You weren't fucking around. Like like you had my respect at that. You didn't need to. You needed not go any further than that. I knew you had all the respect you could have wanted through a one of these types of apps. But I definitely have also a very real appreciation of a person who is willing to not be egotistical and put out a portrayal of themselves that is greater than what they actually are, which I think is what everybody really tries to do, whether they like it or not. But somebody who's really willing to admit something that is so not that it makes you any less of a person or man or anything, but ultimately, if I was an asshole, you would be you're vulnerable at that point, and most people will never allow that to happen. But allowing yourself to be vulnerable and taking the chance on being vulnerable is, in a way, a form of self-confidence and strength that I don't think a lot of people have. I think a lot of people do everything they can to kind of shelter themselves and never feel vulnerable because that's what their predecessors felt was best for them. And ultimately, I don't think it really helps at all. I think a healthy dose of reality is what helps everybody deal with reality.
Well, personally, I think anyone that's ever been a victim of anything in their lives shouldn't be ashamed because of something somebody else has done to them.
No, certainly not.
And if you curl up in a little ball and hide yourself from the world, you're letting that trauma win.
That's true.
When you go out of your way to challenge yourself and get out of your comfort zone, you become bulletproof.
Right. Or at least, at the very least, you become resilient.
Exactly. It's conditioning.
Right.
Conditioning of the mind, the body, and the soul.
Yeah. People really underestimate, and I always talk about doing the work. A lot of people, I think, have a very elementary. I'm not pointing anybody out in particular, but I'm saying a lot of people, unfortunately, have a very, you know, I use the word elementary as in not very advanced perception of what doing work is. Like, one has to realize that in any given, if you do not work as hard as you can at something, anything, you're not very likely to be considered good at it by the people who really are good at it. Because there is somebody else out there that will give that one thing everything. And I'm not saying that's a healthy way to live. I'm not saying you should give any one thing everything you got, but there always will be someone who is willing to do that. And so anytime you think, oh, I'm going to be good at this, or I can do this, or get over on this, you have to realize there's certain people out there that whatever you're choosing, whatever you're talking about, whatever you're getting involved in, they care about almost nothing else. They'll sacrifice almost anything to get that done. And that's a very, very hard person to compete with. If we're talking about, if we're talking about generally a marketplace in which competition is necessary, aka capitalism. So you have to understand, at least, let's put it into terms of starting a business. People try to start a business and it's, well, I have my family and I have, I need a certain amount of personal time to be a healthy person. And I wouldn't disagree. But there's another person out there with that in that business who does not have a family and who will sacrifice their own well-being for the sake of whatever they're doing, at least for a certain amount of time, and you're still competing with that person, whether you like it or not. And that
Right.
That goes for everything,
Yeah, and it all depends on the level of motivation you have, what drives you inside.
Yeah. Like, when no, I'm not making myself out to be, I'm not unique in any way, but like I said, I told you I've never been drunk. That wasn't because I have some type of, religious aversion to alcohol, because
or illegitimate fear.
Not a fear at all. It was really just a understanding that, if I saw people from a young age under the influence, and I saw myself with a certain curiosity, and all I ever really perceived, looking back on it in hindsight, and I couldn't tell you this at the time, but when I look back on it in hindsight, I could genuinely tell you that actually there was a fear. There was a very real fear of me being able to satisfy my curious impulse and compromise it. And I would think about, well, if I was in that state, how much time am I wasting in terms of my ability to wonder? Like, I would think about that, and I would actually think about it to almost, I would spend a deconstructive amount of time thinking about that and actually making myself a little bit irritated with the devil and angel kind of thing, which is like part of me wanted to go have fun and do the same things as all the other kids were doing, and part of me would get irritated because it's like, no, I can't. I want to figure shit out. But I didn't stop at that. It would be like the temptation would come back, and then that irritation would reemerge, and there was like this energy that was spent dealing with that. It definitely was, and that I couldn't help it. It just was the way I was, and it wasn't, So did I deal with it with 100% efficiency? No, but at least I chose not to be, and maybe I'm not saying, I couldn't have chose to use it in moderation or whatever, but like at least I chose a path in which I didn't become an alcoholic, I guess, so, or whatever. I didn't get drunk and do something really stupid and do something that would have harmed somebody else or myself, or whatever the case may be. At least I chose what I perceive now as probably the safer of the two options, if all things were equal, which they never are, but if all things were equal, that would be the way I think I assigned the probability. So, but to say that I'm just better off for it, it's not just that easy to say, because it's a more complex thing, if it makes any sense.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent here. In terms of witchcraft, when practicing rituals, 99% of people won't be able to manifest a demon because they're scared of what they might actually see. Now,
Right. Go ahead.
now I broke through those boundaries, and I have seen demons.
Do you mean demons in the sense that you believe you saw a supernatural entity, or do you believe you conjured something from your own neurochemistry in an unusual and profound way through a process that was, a neurological process that you were able to get a handle over or control over? It's simple. It's like in a similar way that meditation would allow you to see certain things.
Right. It's more conjuration because it was what I would depict one as. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so that answer makes more sense to me because now, take also the sense that this is a very biased statement. I'm admitting to my own. I'm flat out admitting to my own bias. But I studied very hard and I put a lot of work. I think I would like to think into a field that was extremely rigorous and objective and allowed for no imagination of the supernatural. But I can easily understand how a person would be able to alter their own state of consciousness if they put enough work into that instead, so they could have a profound experience that, regardless of how you categorized it from a physical or metaphysical point of view, was beneficial for their consciousness nevertheless. So I'm 100% willing to accept that, always.
Absolutely. All it is, man, there is no supernatural. The things that people see and hear are auditory and visual hallucinations. They're dreaming with their eyes open.
Yeah. It's weird. I remember being a kid and I would close my eyes before I went to sleep. For whatever reason this happened before I went to sleep. I would see this kind of like color pattern, which sounds maybe a little crazy, but I used to see this color pattern before I would go to sleep in particular. I think as I was falling in and out of sleep, I remember there was a color pattern. I remember thinking it looked cool or it looked nice, which is, I don't know that I've ever heard that from anybody else and probably something I kept to myself. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know that it means anything. And it went away as I got older, but it's always been a curious thing to me. Why did my mind do that? What was it doing? Is there any advantage to before you go into sleep seeing colors? I don't know. Clearly, my mind was doing something. I don't think there's anything wrong with my optics, and I don't think that I've not suffered from any other types of hallucinations. So it's always been a curious thing to me. Why did my mind do that?
I believe it's your subconscious mind trying to tell you something. Now, I can't really perceive what it was trying to tell you. What color was it?
It was very much like sometimes there would be different colors. There would be all different colors, but it would be like a changing color, kind of like if you ever looked into like a gyroscope. I think like that kind of thing, but not really as complex. Just a more rudimentary form of a gyroscope, where it almost looked like this. I would think of it as like a star or kind of like a cloud in space that was just kind of changing color. I wasn't able to control it at all. I would just look at it, and it would be very hard to remember at any one given point. It was like a running thing, and the second I opened my eyes or I even thought about it, more than just allowing myself to see it, it would go away. So I couldn't really. In a weird way, I can remember experiencing it, but I couldn't really remember it in so much detail that I could confess all the details about it to you. I just remember the event occurring, which is, I'd love to tell you like all these interesting details about what it was to make it sound cooler than I'm making it sound, but I don't have those details. I just remember the curiosity and going, I'm letting you think it. The second I start to look into it too much, go.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. And I mean, you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, my computer's acting a little funky.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all about an underlying message, man, because the fact of the matter is we only use 10% of our brain power.
Yeah.
And the subconscious mind lies dormant while we're awake.
Sure does.
Of course, you're going to have little slips where you see color